As government ministers claim credit in campaign rallies for killing terrorists across India's borders, what's the diplomatic fallout likely to be, given those cases in the US, Canada, and Pakistan? When it comes to transnational killings, are there any rules? And is India the victim of double standards? Hello and welcome to Worldview at the Hindu with me, Suhasini Haider. Of course, we've been looking at this issue, the allegations of transnational killings, for some months now on Worldview. But this week we are looking at the legal wrongs and the rights of transnational killings per se, and the sometimes confusing stand of the government. To recap the developments this week, British newspaper The Guardian reported that Indian intelligence agents are believed to have orchestrated up to 20 killings of alleged Khalistani separatists and Jihadist terrorists in Pakistan. Now, in the article, the Ministry of External Affairs denied the charges, cited External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's previous statement that targeted killings is not India's policy. However, there on the road, in campaign statements and an interview by Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, the government appeared to be accepting the charges, taking a very different track. Listen in.
2 दिन पहले ब्रिटेन के प्रतिष्ठित माने जाने वाले एक समाचार पत्र की एक रिपोर्टिंग हम सबका ध्यान आकर्षित करती है, दुनिया का ध्यान आकर्षित करती है। उन्होंने इस बात का उल्लेख किया है कैसे पाकिस्तान के अंदर चुन चुन करके आतंकवादी मारे गए थे।
कोई भी टेररिस्ट हमारे पड़ोसी देश से भारत को डिस्टर्ब करने की कोशिश करेगा जी, यहां पर यदि आतंकवादी हरकतें करेगा तो उसका मुंह तोड़ जवाब देंगे। यदि वो भगकर पाकिस्तान में जाएगा तो पाकिस्तान में घुस कर मारेंगे।
तो ये बात आप मतलब कह रहे हैं, जो प्रधानमंत्री भी कह रहे हैं कि अब वो भारत नहीं रहा जो कि बगल में खड़े होकर तमाशा देखता रहेगा, घर में घुस कर मारेगा।
बिल्कुल, प्रधानमंत्री जी ने जो कहा है बिल्कुल सच कहा है और यह ताकत है भारत की, और पाकिस्तान भी इसे समझने लगा है। वैसे भारत बराबर अपने पड़ोसी देशों के साथ अच्छे रिश्ते बनाकर रखना चाहता है, चाहे कोई भी हमारा पड़ोसी देश है। और आज देखा होगा आपने, पास्ट हिस्ट्री उठाकर देखिए कि आज तक न तो हमने दुनिया के किसी देश पर कभी आक्रमण किया है अथवा आक्रमण की कोई पहल की हो, कभी नहीं किया, और न तो दुनिया के किसी देश की 1 इंच जमीन पर हम लोगों ने कभी कब्जा करने की कोशिश की है। यह भारत का चरित्र रहा है जी। लेकिन भारत को बार बार कोई आंख दिखाएगा, भारत में आकर आतंकवादी गतिविधियों को बढ़ावा कर देने की कोशिश करेगा तो उसकी खैर नहीं है।
In fact, Prime Minister Modi had also repeated his 2019 slogans this week of "Ghar mein ghus ke marenge" for terrorists, or "We will kill them in their homes." So what's the diplomatic fallout likely to be? The immediate fallout, of course, of the remarks came from Pakistan, where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already accused India of the killing of 2 men. Remember, in January, they spoke about this, and they said in this latest statement, India's assertion of its preparedness to extrajudicially execute more civilians arbitrarily pronounced as terrorists inside Pakistan constitutes a clear admission of culpability. However, given the poor state of relations with Pakistan at this time, that's unlikely to be an issue for New Delhi. Let's turn to Washington then. And the US State Department actually declined to comment on the Guardian story. But the larger question is, will the assertions being made by the government now be used by the US Justice Department, who is expected to begin the trial this summer of Nikhil Gupta, an Indian that the FBI claims hired hitmen against Khalistani separatist Gurpatwant Singh Pannun in New York last year at the behest of senior Indian intelligence agents. And there in Canada, that is yet to provide evidence of its claims, the country continues to say it is pursuing the involvement of Indian government agents in the killing of Khalistani separatist Nijar outside Toronto also last year. In fact, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau doubled down on his claims in a public hearing this week. Listen in.
And how we have stood up for Canadians, including in the very serious case that I brought forward to Parliament of the killing of Nijar, demonstrates our government's commitment to defending the rights and freedoms of Canadians, for whom, which are the reasons for which so many people crossed oceans and continents to come live in this country and build this country. And the suggestion that we can.
So what is the international law that actually operates here? In fact, there isn't one law, but there are three different laws. The first really, and remember, these are international laws, so they really depend on the compliance of the state in question. These are not something that are easy to actually induce another country to do. So the first one is international human rights law. That derives from the original Universal Declaration of Human Rights that every country has signed on to, that guarantees every citizen's right to life and liberty. But then there is also an international humanitarian law. This looks really at armed conflicts. It sets down the principles of protecting non-combatants during an armed conflict. So you have to ask the question, is there a conflict underway? Is there a constant conflict when it comes to terrorism? Of course, the international humanitarian law says they must be protected. The states have certain obligations even during war or self-defense operations. So it does include, in a sense, these transnational killings. And then the third part, which many states have actually used, most recently we've heard this coming from Israel, is the United Nations Charter, Chapter 7, Article 51, that talks about action with respect to threats to the peace, breaches of peace, and acts of aggression. So in Article 51 of that Chapter 7, it says nothing impairs the right of individuals or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations. So it does seem as if many of those threads could actually come together, or they could contradict each other. So it does seem confusing, especially as global powers seem to carry out such operations at will. To give you some examples, the US killing of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen, Iranian General Soleimani in Iraq some years ago, hundreds of drone strikes in Afghanistan and Iraq. There's also Israel's targeted killings by Mossad, including now the bombing of the Iranian embassy in Syria most recently, and where another Iranian general was killed. Russia, remember, is consistently accused of targeted assassinations of its own dissident citizens abroad. It's even been sanctioned for it. China is accused of assassinations and repression through illegal police stations that they use in the US and Europe. It hasn't been sanctioned yet in quite the same way. And then there was Saudi Arabia. It was accused of killing journalist Jamal Khashoggi and faced a Western boycott. But it was a diplomatic boycott, and it does certainly seem to have dissipated somewhat now. So on this week's Parlay at The Hindu, I asked two experts, former Ambassador Rakesh Sood and analyst who was with the National Security Council, Dr. Tara Karta, on whether there is a double standard for India and where the line on targeted transnational killings actually should be drawn.
There is no clear definition in international law of targeted killings in that sense. But what has happened conventionally is that, let's say if there is an individual who is internationally designated as a terrorist, which means it would be he or she would be designated as a terrorist under the United Nations Security Council designation list, number one. Number two, on top of that, there is a very clear sense that it is very difficult to get hold of this person or get the person extradited or in any way brought to face judicial proceedings. And add to that a third factor, that if it is felt that the person continues to remain engaged in terrorist activity, and so therefore a state feels that it is preferable and to use lethal force in a preemptive fashion, in a manner in which it is precise so that it does not cause additional damage or does not
Collateral damage.
kill collateral damage or kill other people, innocent people, etc., etc., then that is seen in common parlance. That is what is called a targeted killing.
I think it's massively, double standards, because you've had this whole targeted killings has come out from what? Post 9/11, when they've used drone strike, they've used every kind of attack, not just in Afghanistan, but you remember George Bush's call to the world that we will attack you wherever you are because it's self-defense. So the underlying, the underlying criteria for any such attack, targeted attack, killings, is self-defense. And it is allowed by the UN because the UN Charter says you have, Article 51 says you have a right, individual right of self-defense. Now, the thing is, since we are talking in relation to the Guardian story, I assume, is that the problem with that article is it brings in assassinations, targeted killings, and extrajudicial killing all in the same basket, in the same article, which is crazy. Each one has a different legal, connotation to it.
And you can actually listen to the entire Parley podcast on the Hindu's website or wherever you get your podcast, or read about it in the Hindu. That's coming out next week. So that was just a sneak peek for you. But let's get you Worldview's take. There is no question that global powers set different standards for themselves and for other countries, including India. India's rise in the world, but remember, thus far, has come on the backs of a moral principle. And when it comes to transnational operations, India has so far maintained distance and deniability. It's not that it didn't happen, India just didn't assert it in quite the same way. If the government wants to go public with its assertions now, it must ensure that India has the diplomatic heft to deal with the consequences, which could at some point escalate. Let's also get you some Worldview reading recommendations. So the first is a book about the US called Enemies Known and Unknown, Targeted Killings in America's Transnational War. This is by Jack McDonald. It's a slightly academic book, but it really has a lot of examples in it. Another one called No Easy Day, the first-hand account of the mission that killed Osama bin Laden. This is by Mark Owen, one of the SEALs who actually went in there in Abbottabad. It doesn't make so much as a case for the killing of Osama bin Laden, but there are parts in there that deal with the fact that America believes this was a completely lawful operation. There's Blood for Blood, 50 years of the global Khalistani project. This is by Terry Milewski. I've spoken about it before. Talks about some of the justifications that India has now talked about when it comes to demanding action against Khalistani separatists. Then there's The Killing in the Consulate, of course, about Jamal Khashoggi by Jonathan Rugman. Sudden Justice, America's Secret Drone Wars by Chris Woods. And then there's Targeted Killings, Law and Morality in an Asymmetrical World. It's edited by Claire Finkelstein and some others, and it really looks at the international law aspect of all of this. Finally, there's Rise and Kill First, The Secret History of Israel's Targeted Assassinations. This is by Ronan Bergman. I've spoken about it before as well. But that's all we have time for here on Worldview, but do join us again. And from the team, thanks for watching.